Something that I haven't heard people talk about is the difference between growing up in the ghetto and growing up in the suburbs, a middle class, like in a middle class town. And as I've lived in both the ghetto, I grew up most of my younger years from like elementary school to middle school. I lived in pretty much the ghettos from multiple bad areas. And then when I went into high school, I ended up living in a middle class neighborhood. And one of the crazy things that I noticed was that everybody struggled, like whether you were a middle class student or a middle class person or a ghetto child, you still struggled. But the biggest difference was that the ghetto children, they were so focused on the actual like bad things where like their parents were either on drugs or in prison or in jail doing illegal stuff. And the kids were afraid that maybe they wouldn't have food that month. Like the parents wouldn't be able to pay for food, or maybe they were going to get evicted or weird stuff like that. So real tangible physical stuff were the things that a lot of the kids in the ghetto were afraid of. So it almost seemed like they didn't have anything to lose. So I don't know, like that, when I was living in that life, in that period of my life, it was like when we hung out in the town on the streets and everything, it was like we were just trying to make the most of it. Like we were playing, we were trying to have a good time in spite of what problems we had at home. When I went into the middle class lifestyle, and I actually lived with a friend, so I ended up living with my friend and his family in the middle class family when I was in high school. It seemed like the suffering that the kids in the middle class had was mental. They weren't struggling physically, obviously. They didn't have the scarcity of food or the inability to buy clothes, school shopping and everything. None of those struggles existed. So it seemed like they had to make up some sort of struggle. Like the struggle that they had was an identity struggle or like a lot of weird mental health stuff. So although in ghetto schools and everything, there were still cliques and gossiping and all that normal stuff, it just seemed like it wasn't as, like when it came to people having an identity and everything, it seemed like everything worked itself out nicely. So I think the biggest takeaway that I had was that people, like the struggle is different. Obviously in the ghetto, the struggle is not having resources. In the middle class areas, the struggle is all mental and whether or not you're cool enough or whether or not you fit in. And from my experience, I would choose the ghetto struggle any day. When you have to struggle mentally, it freaking sucks. Like everything's all up in the head. Like you're like people, a lot of people are lying. A lot of people are faking who they are and everything. Whereas in the ghetto, the stories that the kids had, they were legit. It's like people's parents were in the cartel and stuff. People's parents were in gangs. People's parents were selling drugs and all that stuff. People had guns and people really got shot. When I lived in this neighborhood in Sacramento, California, it was like, it's a notoriously bad area called South Sacramento. And there was this neighbor that we had, and he was in this MS-13 gang. He was a Sordeño. So like, it's like the blue guys, essentially the blue gangsters. And I remember hearing a story, like he was out, and apparently he died. And one of the people on the rival gangs, they were like fighting and stuff. And I guess they were running, and he accidentally got hit by a train. Like he tripped, or I don't know the full story, but somehow they were running it around the train tracks and he got decapitated. And I remember hearing that story and it was crazy. I remember when I was a kid, me and my sister, so it was the same area and it was the same kid's house. So we were in this apartment, and his apartment, the kid that got his head decapitated, we were just sitting up one of the late nights, when you're in middle school or whatever, or teenager years, you guys stay up late. So I think it was around like 1 a.m. or something, maybe 12, 1. And these couple Mexican dudes just come running through the apartment complex, and they just start shooting up at at the dude's apartment and stuff. And me and my sister just watching, and we're like, damn, dude, what the heck? Like, it happened so fast that we didn't even have a chance to be scared. We were just like, all right, that just happened. And there was this other time where there were like a bunch of dudes like a bunch of big black dudes. They come into the apartment complex, and like they have like this long rod covered with like a blanket or something, and it was very obvious that it was like a shotgun or something, or some big gun. And then they go into this apartment and they just start screaming. You just hear yelling in the apartment complex, and then all the kids go inside their apartments and everything, because it was like something's going down. No, luckily nothing happened that night. There were no gunshots. And then in that same apartment complex, stupid crazy, I think it was around like 2 a.m. or something, or 3 a.m. We hear glass shattering, and it was right next door. And this dude is holding a machine gun to this other dude, and like he's like screaming. He wakes it was like a dude and a chick, and he wakes them up, and I forget, he's like asking for money or something, like his money, not like just asking for money. It wasn't like a robbery. It was like the dude actually owed the other dude money, and it happened for a long time. I was a kid. I was scared. I think I cried, and me and my mom and my sister, we were on the ground. I think we were like in the closet on the ground and everything, and then the dude leaves, and then all we hear is, so the dude leaves, no shots, nothing happened. But then the dude that was getting stuck up, and the chick, he was like, come on, we gotta go. We're going to Hollywood and stuff. And then like he jumps on the phone with somebody and like is like telling everybody like they need to go to Hollywood for something. So that was that, but that was scary as heck, because the dude had a freaking machine gun. And so when things like that happened, you know, it's like those are legitimate stuff that is happening, and that's enough to take a lot of your conscious focus on, you know, your conscious focus is on that. Or when you're out, when you're going to the middle school, whether you're in high school, there's like real physical threats that you're focused on. And then like, but being a suburban kid and living and going to like a suburban high school and stuff, it's like, you're so focused on like your clothes, like there's nothing to focus on, you know, like sure there's fights and everything, but it's not really serious to the point to where you actually have to worry about whether or not somebody's going to try to kill you or whatever, or, you know, some idiot's going to be like, oh, my uncle is a gangster and everything. Who knows? But yeah, it's very weird. And I think that the thing is that there's pros and cons to both. I think that you need to have a little bit of a mixture of both experiences, where if you're a middle-class suburban kid, you could have a really hard time understanding life. One thing that I notice is that like when you take like the ultra poor people from the ghetto, and then you take the ultra rich, they both know that life is about one thing: the bag, getting the money. I'm not saying that's the way it has to be. I'm not saying that's the way people should live, but that's the way the world is. Everybody cares about money. And if you don't care about getting your money, if you're not getting your money up, nobody is going to do it for you. And people are going to use you as much as they can to get their money up. And then the people in the middle class, they tend to be so caught up in these like games that like, not like class games, but like, it's like the hierarchy, like, am I cool? Am I cooler than you? Do I have higher status and stuff? Like, they get caught up in those status games, kind of. Whereas, like, the people in the ghetto, they don't care. They just need to get the money. And then the ultra rich, I feel like, because I'm not ultra rich, but this is kind of what I assume. Both sides tend to really focus on just getting theirs, you know, getting ownership over assets and everything, whereas the middle class will get caught up in whether or not they have cool titles and everything. So that's something that I thought about, and that's something that's really interesting. But I don't think this gets talked about enough. I'm not sure how many people grew up in the ghetto, and then also, so you hear of a lot of people. There are people who grew up in the ghetto and then they become rich when they're adults. But growing up in the ghetto and then also growing up in the middle class suburban areas, so like that's different, because it's like you still get to experience both worlds while you're still young. And another thing that I wanted to say on that is that it's very weird being in high school or being in middle school and living in the ghetto and then going to high school and then going into a middle class suburban area, because you could start to feel very weird And at first you feel weird, you feel like you don't belong, and like maybe everybody thinks you're poor or whatever, or you're from the ghetto and stuff. But something that I really realized was that there was something that I couldn't describe that these kids from the middle class suburban areas didn't know. And I guess it was just life, you know, the brutality of life, the realness of life, and how brutal it can get, and really how it's just, you know, it's all about, for the most part, you got to man up when you become an adult. You have to man up. You have to stand on business for the most part, and a lot of the middle class kids don't understand this, whereas the ghetto kids, they learned it from a very young age. And then also it seemed like the middle class kids were yearning for stories. They were yearning for some experiences. It seemed like their only experience was waking up, going to school, doing some sort of after school program, and then being at their desk studying. Whereas a lot of ghetto kids had experienced spending the night at other people's houses, being in dangerous scenarios, just like adventuring around the town and everything, and just many different scenarios. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, it's just different. But either way, if you were somebody who had an experience where you were from the ghetto or from a lower class area and then transitioned to living in a middle class area, or if you have that experience at all, leave a comment about your experience and if you kind of agree with what I said, or maybe there's something else that I missed out on. But yeah, it's very trippy. And also, my name is Roman Kenrick. This is my channel where I do these raw, unfiltered talks with no editing or anything. I have other channels and stuff, but this is what this channel is about. So if you like that type of stuff, consider hitting the subscribe button. I release a video on this channel every day at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's California time zone. And yeah, if you liked this video, please give it a like. It helps a lot with the algorithm and everything. And I look forward to talking to you guys later. Take care.